Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Finance Feed Podcast. My name is Nikolai Isayev. I'm the editor-in-chief of FinanceFeeds. I'm joined today by James Alexander, who's Chief Commercial Officer at Invast Global. James, thanks for taking the time to join me and speak to me today, all the way from Australia. Welcome.
It's a pleasure, Nikolai. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise. So listen, last time we saw each other was actually in June of this year in Limassol in Cyprus. I wanted to ask how your summer's been going, and I know right now you're in Australia. How often do you go to Cyprus? Because it seems like every time I see you, it's usually in Cyprus.
I get that a lot, actually. My summer was brief because down here in Australia, we're actually just coming off the tail end of our winter. But having spent a few weeks in Cyprus and managing to get over to a couple of the other countries there on the continent in Europe, it was lovely. It's nice to always get over to that part of the world and enjoy a couple of weeks of warm weather before we come back here and sort of hunker down for the winter. But look, it's certainly been a pleasure to get back to Cyprus. You know, we had a few years there where, with everything going on with COVID, we weren't able to get back as regularly as we would have liked. And to be honest, you know, this year at the IFX, I actually, for the first time, felt a real sense of nostalgia. Because it had been a few years since I got to catch up with some of the people that we, previously were seeing, every 3 months, every 6 months. For the first time, I sort of, got to IFX and went, yeah, I've really missed this. Like, I've really missed a lot of the people here. I've missed a lot of the chats, the conversation. So, yeah, it was good to get over there, and, it was good to catch up with yourself. And, we've got a Cypriot office now, which is fantastic. It's still in its operational stages. It's got about 13 staff. We opened that up in the middle of 2021 or early 2021. So it's really finding its feet now, and that's been a real boom for us. It's good to have an office in the actual local jurisdiction, be able to support clients more fully from that time zone as well. Whereas previously everything was being done 5.5 from Sydney, Australia. So, to be able to get over there to meet the guys in the office that we've hired has been amazing. To spend a bit of time with our new CEO over there, Rihanna, was fantastic as well. And just, mate, to be honest, just the feeling of being able to catch up with people who we'd seen exclusively over Zoom for the better part of 2 years was good. It was a nice feeling. So, long may it live.
Mm-hmm. No, I must tell you, I share that feeling because, we were kind of cooped in or whatever, right? We in our respective countries, households, and everything like that for so long, and it's definitely refreshing to see a lot of familiar faces and really kind of catch up and get back into that vibe. I guess there's a vibe at some of these conferences that we go to that kind of helps us interact, cooperate, and really get business done at the end of the day as well. Do you foresee that you'll be traveling quite often to Cyprus, going forward now that, COVID restrictions have been lifted somewhat, right? Kind of like, will you be splitting your time between Australia and Cyprus or other European countries? I don't know if that fits into sort of your role at Invast these days.
It definitely does. And the short answer is yes. I'll still be spending quite a bit of time in Cyprus with the team. We've got a lot of big ambitions, not just in Cyprus, but across continental Europe and into the UK as well. There are certainly plans afoot to expand further our geographic footprint. That's about as much as I can say on that for now, but there might be some updates later this year. But Cyprus has certainly been a key focus. I mean, we've got so many good relationships based on the island that, to not have that as our first European time zone office just didn't feel right. There was too many people that we sort of felt we wanted to be in more regular contact with and able to support operationally in a much fuller way that, it felt like the right place to start. But, the fact that we've got a team there doesn't preclude a lot of the guys from, and I say guys in the communal sense, guys and girls here in Sydney traveling over. And it's one of the nice things about the way we structure our business is we actively encourage people to move around. And sort of, I guess, be seconded between the offices. We've got a lot of young staff here, sort of in their mid to late 20s. And, the opportunity for them to spend 3-6 months in Cyprus and, use that as the base for, exploring Europe. They do a bit of travel on the weekends, things like that. It's a really nice sort of perk. We do the same thing with our Tokyo-based office as well, which I think is great. And look, the reality is we're all human beings, right? We all enjoy those experiences. We all benefit from the input of, other people, other cultures, spending time on the ground and actually really understanding what, your clients in that region want and need. It's only a benefit to the business as well. So it's nice for staff. It's good for the business. So yes, we're still going to be pushing people around, but I dare say that you and I are probably going to cross paths in Cyprus sometime real soon.
Oh, of course, or some other country where there's another conference taking place. Of course, no doubt.
Yeah, sure.
So to sort of talk shop a little bit, I wanted to ask you about what your thoughts are on the current prime of prime space. Like, where should POP providers be focusing, or prime of prime be focusing its efforts, and how do you think it could improve? Like, there's it's an ongoing topic really of discussion.
Yeah. It very much is. And it is a super interesting time in the prime of prime space. I think the key thing that has emerged over the last 6 months has been the departure of Jefferies. And there's some late breaking news there that perhaps there will be actually a transition or a handover of what is left of that Jefferies FX prime of prime business to another party, as yet unconfirmed as to who may be the recipient of what's left of that business. But Jefferies exiting the space was big. And I don't know how well that is understood in the broader industry, but for those clients who were onboarded with Jefferies, for those of us who are in the prime of prime space directly, Jefferies' departure has had definite implications for the sector. I think that, without commenting on the two figureheads of the Jefferies business, both of whom are very well liked, very well respected people, and great guys, to put it bluntly. I think that a business like that choosing not to move forward in the FX prime of prime space is interesting, and really sends a message about where prime of primes need to focus, where they need to be trying to deliver value and derive value for themselves, and really how to structure their engagement with clients. I think there's got to be a bit of a mindset shift amongst some of the prime of primes, because that was a big one, to put it bluntly. That really was a big one. And I think if I break it down, there's sort of two areas where I think, in my humble opinion, prime of primes would do well to focus over the next sort of 12 to 24 months, and noting that there are slightly different business models and nuances of how they go about their strategy within the prime of prime space. I think BAU done well is going to be a real focus, and then future proofing. And things that I'd put into the category of BAU done well is really focusing on the quality of execution, ensuring stable access, robust access to credit, because that is not a given, and a focus on some of the, I guess, what have traditionally been called the non-core segments of prime of prime. So an example of that might be market data. We talk so much about liquidity and how prime of primes should focus on the way in which they deliver liquidity, how they deliver liquidity, that, it can often be the only conversation in the room. And look, don't get me wrong, liquidity is crucial. Pricing is crucial for a quality prime of prime offering, but it's not the only conversation. And funnily enough, when you have tier one prime brokers like Credit Suisse actively withdrawing from the prime broking space, essentially globally, I mean, they've left some, some small footprints here in Asia, in the APAC region, but they've really, exited prime of prime by and large across Europe and the US. And, credit and access to credit and being able to clear trades is a really funny thing. It's the most boring conversation, but like oxygen, as soon as it starts to run a little low, it's the only conversation in the room. If credit starts to run lean, everyone starts to breathe a little deeper. And it's that I think, prime of primes are going to struggle with. And, not all prime of primes. There are, very much stratified layers in the prime of prime space, like there is in the retail broking space. But I think some of the smaller primes that don't necessarily have stable or consistent access to enough credit, they're really going to struggle over the next 12 months. So I think, focusing there is going to be crucial. And I think, those prime of primes that have access to the tier one PBs that provide the ultimate, credit lifelines are going to do very, very well. And I believe that, from what we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months, we're already seeing that shake through. We're already seeing clients who are coming to us saying, look, we are not able to access the credit that we need elsewhere. How can you help us? How can you, step in and fill this void? And I think that's going to be an ongoing theme, because I do not think that this restriction of credit that's happening at the tier 1 PBs is going to stop where we are presently. I think it is going to be a theme that continues over the foreseeable future. So, I think for primes to focus on credit, to focus on quality of execution, I think is going to be crucial. It's interesting because we see a lot of challenges in the retail broking space. I think there is a real price competitiveness that has come into the retail sector of late that is quite fierce. And I think that, one thing that gets lost in the conversation about price again, and, making sure that retail brokers are able to present the tightest possible executions and prices to clients, is that execution piece. Price is one, but execution is crucial. And I think that, the conversation potentially needs to shift a little more to the quality of execution, not just at the retail level, but also at the prime level. So I think that as technologies evolve that give retail brokers a little more transparency, the primes would do very well to focus on the quality of execution that they're delivering to their retail brokers as well.
Sure.
And quality of execution is one thing, but down here in Asia, I guess, it's really got to be remembered, Nikolai, that we don't have a best execution regulatory requirement in Asia. It doesn't exist as a strict, regulatory framework like it does in Europe. And I think in Asia in particular, I think that both the retail broker and the prime broker space needs to be spending a little more time and effort focusing on that execution piece, because it does feel to me anecdotally a little suboptimal right now. And I think there's definitely room to improve there. And the final bit of BAU done well that I mentioned before is market data. Market data coming in from various exchanges, be they equities, be they futures, the listed markets, equities and derivatives. I think this is an area where primes have a real responsibility. In many ways, we are, I guess, the conduit to the real markets for a number of the retail brokers. It's difficult to achieve scale with market data, and yet there's a huge amount of pressure on retail brokers to deliver a broader asset class, multi-asset, equities, futures, whatever options, whatever it might be. But often those products are accessed and executed and cleared through primes, with the prime also serving as the provider of data for those products. And
correct.
Like executions, there's primes that do data well, and there's other primes. And it does feel like that is an area in particular where there needs to be a renewed focus from some within the sector, because I feel like as the gatekeepers to those markets for the retail sector, there is a level of responsibility. I mean, obviously, that comes in. It's both contractual, it's legal, but also moral responsibility to ensure that when we're providing products and services to customers, the retail brokers that we serve, we're doing so in a way that doesn't compromise, their integrity. And I think that, there's going to be an increased focus on, market data done well, market data done cost effectively going forward. And I think that, to its credit, I think the industry broadly has made significant progress over the last few years. I really do think that the industry is headed in the right direction. And I think that the direction of travel is good there. And I think that by and large, the industry is really stepping up. And I think that's fantastic. But I think there's leaders and there's laggards. And I think the laggards are going to struggle increasingly if they don't sort of step into the right side of the arena, so to speak. So that's sort of the BAU things. And sorry.
Sure. No, go ahead.
The future proofing that I mentioned as well is, we think about how primes can future proof. Or we've talked about access to credit. If they've got that, if they've got, a good level of technology, then that becomes the final frontier, because, pricing, there is control there within the primes. They can pull on different levers to affect pricing. But technology and being able to scale, with the growth that comes from access to credit and with the concentration that I think is likely to occur within the prime space, I think that technology and the scalability there is going to be the last crucial element in ensuring that the next sort of phase of growth for primes is a successful one. And, people aren't constrained from a technology perspective, because with multi-asset, thousands of instruments coming into our infrastructure, with LPs quoting at ever faster update rates, ECNs going down to, increasingly low rates of refresh. There is an ever increasing load on the technology, be it quote updates, instruments, orders coming in from an increasing client base. Ensuring that scalability is pretty important right now.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with pretty much everything that you touched upon. And it's interesting that you mentioned market data, and specifically the point about, we often don't realize that, as brokers expand their product sets to what feels like an infinite amount of products on their trading platforms, based on, I guess, demand from their customers, or opportunities or revenue opportunities as well, right? In terms of revenue that could be generated from trades on those markets. It's sort of like not everybody always realizes that there is a very big component, which is, like you said, market data. And as those product sets get more and more as they expand, like you said, there's a load on the technology. There's also the question of how are these products classified, whether, if we're talking about equities versus futures versus options versus spot FX versus crypto. In my experience, I remember doing a webinar last year for a technology vendor, an exchange being the CBOE, and and other stakeholders, and how it's really a lot of moving parts. It can't all be done. It seems like it can't all be done by one party. It has to be an amalgamation of a few players that have it all in sync, and it all is supposed to jive and sort of work in conjunction, right? All of these technology systems, the data itself, it has to be parsed correctly, and all of these different things. And it's interesting that you bring up execution, and you phrased it as quality of execution, whereas for years we've been, at least in Europe, right? In part because of regulations, we're used to hearing best execution, and here we're speaking specifically about quality of execution. And when you said that, I started thinking about price analysis. Let's say for retail clients, right? Retail clients who are trading on at brokerages, kind of, and analyzing their prices. I can see that today you can't say that one price is the end all be all. Like, that's the price that at that millisecond or at that tick, that was the best price in the market. And that's, if you didn't get executed that price, then you didn't get best execution. I feel like these days, you can't say that anymore. There's a certain range within the prices that your trade could, or your order could be executed at. And in my mind, if it's within that range, that's an acceptable range of pricing. Do you agree with that?
Look, broadly, I do. I absolutely do. And, I agree with the notion that best execution is a challenging thing to really accurately benchmark. I think that what it comes down to, in my opinion, is, ensuring that certain key elements of the execution experience are benchmarked and meet an acceptable level, a fair level, or a benchmark level of performance over a number of trades. And the number doesn't need to be huge. I mean, this can be a process that you ran with an individual retail trader, placing half a dozen trades a month. That sort of time frame is enough to start to build an assessment of performance. So while I agree that any snapshot of any particular quote book from any particular provider on any given day is not necessarily the judgment of, did I get executed against the exact quote that I tried to hit at that point in time? It's not so much that, but it's things like, so, let's just break down a couple of the elements, and I'm certainly not going to try and be exhaustive here, but at that time, was the price that was shown as a retail trader, the price I was being shown from my broker, a fair representation of the market mid? Was my broker's price significantly skewed from what can be relatively easily benchmarked as a fair market mid? We've got ample access to data out there. There are interbank venues, there are non-bank streams, there's aggregated pricing available from any number of venues, many of which are available as, purchasable price packages. A number of the ECN venues will actually sell their top of book, mid-rate, their tickers, essentially. And that can be used as a benchmark or a reference. Whatever you choose to use as your benchmark, how did that mid compared to the mid at which I was executed? Is my price being skewed?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a really simple thing. Then, the rate of reject, the average hold time for that order, if it was held. And this is something that maybe touches more on the institutional side than the retail side. But, I think hold times are still very, very relevant. And I'm not just talking about FX here or metals here. Index and commodity products are also subject to significant hold times depending on the execution venue that, a retail broker might be trading. And I think it is something that can impact, the quality of execution overall. VWAP slippage, simply presenting a top of book is understandable if there are technology constraints, i.e. the trading platform on which the retail, trader is actually executing. But ultimately being able to assess where that order, the retail client order, should have been executed against that quote book on average, and is that particular trader being filled at an accurate and a fair and consistent VWAP rate when their orders are larger than the top of book quantity. And I think that metric in particular is one that really is not well assessed at the retail level or the retail broker level, and where I think there is significant room for technology to enhance visibility and transparency, to improve conversations both between the liquidity providers and the retail broker, whether they be, bank or non-bank LPs or prime or primes, and also between the retail broker and their end clients, the retail trader or investor. I think that, that sort of analysis coming off increasingly sophisticated technologies at scale is going to be a really, really positive development for our market, because that sort of analysis isn't hard. The mathematics of it isn't hard. The technology of it isn't hard. It's just making it scalable and accessible to retail brokers and therefore retail traders in a way that is cost effective. That's been the challenge. And I think, in the next, 12 months, I think what we're going to see is a real proliferation of technologies that better empowers that conversation with retail brokers and adds a huge amount of transparency. And, coming back to my previous point on prime primes, and I think one thing that, they would do well to focus on over the next 12 months, I think it's focus on the quality of executions, because I think those that don't are going to increasingly be found wanting by the technology that's coming to market through many of the the bridges and the retail infrastructure that sort of sits around these trading systems. And we at Invast, me personally, I absolutely welcome it. I think it's a great change for our industry, and the quicker it can be rolled out, implemented, uptaken, and really sort of start to drive conversations, the better.
No, and I completely agree with you. I feel like it would be the next logical step or evolution, right, in the sort of analysis of pricing and just the way things run, both on the retail and institutional side, in the grand scheme of things when it comes to pricing. So I definitely agree with you there. So, you mentioned sort of the current things that are going on with Prime of Prime. You mentioned Jeffries, you mentioned access to credit, and these are some of the things that could be impacting the space, in the next, let's say, 12 months, maybe more, maybe sooner, maybe later. Obviously, the space is always changing, right? From technology standpoint, the things that retail brokers, you're essentially your clients are looking for, and things like that. But where do you see things heading over the next few years? Like if we take like a longer view sort of into the future, kind of what are you sensing in terms of the next few years, and how do you see Invast positioned to adapt to these possible changes that you see over a longer period of time?
Yeah, sure. I think we've had the view here at Invast that the regulatory environment is only going to continue in its current direction of travel, which is to become more constrictive and more restrictive. And I think that, we've established a business model and a strategy here that really tries to best cater for that. It's our view that the regulatory changes that are currently constraining the tier one investment banks, Basel II, Basel III, and capital adequacy rules that sort of they contain, are not going away anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And as a result of, these regulatory changes that, really sit at the macroeconomic level, there is a huge opportunity for certain entity types to flourish. Like we've seen the non-bank market makers really sort of come to the fore in recent years in the FX liquidity provision, and indeed, making markets behind the scenes in equities, in futures, in fixed income markets. I think that in our sector of the industry, the opportunity for large entities, well capitalized, with access to ample credit, to really step in and fill that void that is being created as the tier one investment banks step back, and they are continuing to step back in our experience. I think that there is a real sort of, gap opening up there in the market for primes to fill. And I think that those with a strong balance sheet, as I mentioned, are going to do quite well over the next sort of 3 to 5 years as the regulatory environment sort of continues over that timeline, at least in our view.
Sure.
And so I think that's a really positive thing. And, we've actively set our strategy and our growth plans for such an environment. And I think that, it is a little bit of a cliche, but continuing to invest in technology is crucial. And, it's an easy thing to say. And I dare say that every level of our market talks about technology, be they liquidity providers, be they prime or primes, be they the retail brokers. For us, we have literally just in the last few weeks finished a complete overhaul of our core trading infrastructure and our aggregation engines. We've been operating in Sydney, Australia for the last 9 years using a particular technology vendor. We've actually replaced that vendor by and large with a completely new aggregation system. So for us, we're not just talking about the importance of investing in technology and upgrading technology. It's something that we've actively lived through. We've migrated hundreds and hundreds of APIs across New York, London, Tokyo over the last sort of 8 to 12 weeks, bringing all of our clients on this journey with us. And all of this has been done with really two focuses in mind. One being scale and ensuring that we have more than enough scale within our technology to continue to grow. And also being able to deliver to clients additional features, additional benefits, additional products that, newer technologies allow for, that deliver, a growth edge, an advantage to our customers. Because, being fast and FX aggregation, being, lean, being, really competitive there is the core of what we do. But increasingly, it feels like there needs to be further value add, whether they be structured products. And there's a couple of products we're working on internally at the moment that we're going to start to release via API. Things like pairs trading products, which is a single instrument streamed on API. So, long Tesla, short Ford. Essentially, a single equity versus another as a pairs trade, but constructed as a single instrument, single margin, which allows clients to do things like leave stop losses, take profits against those sorts of instruments. I think, areas like that, that technology enables better are going to be crucial as well. So, I see the next few years as a focus on regulation and making sure that the simple things are done well, access to credit, but also delivering unique value add, things, products, services that actually allow our clients to differentiate themselves a little more than perhaps they can now.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. James, my last question about Prime of Prime, this is actually related to today's news. You guys onboarded Cyrus Poon, I believe his name is, right?
We did indeed, yep.
And he joined as MD of Prime Services. Is this sort of related to everything that you and I have just been speaking about, sort of your vision for the future for your Prime Services and things like that? It was Cyrus's hiring sort of part of the strategy?
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, look, I'm certainly more than happy to. Cyrus is a great guy. He's someone I came across in business about 7 or 8 years ago and was very, very impressed by. He was actually working at a former customer of mine at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, one of those people that's always on your radar. In addition to the prime segment where we serve our, broker customers at a wholesale level, we also have a division within our business that focuses on predominantly long, short equity trading to small to medium-sized hedge funds and professional individuals. It sits a little bit aside from the broker segment, and there's actually some evolutions taking place within that structure that will make themselves known to market in the coming months. But we have a very strong and bullish view of that segment, and it very much aligns with, the strategy that I mentioned before, where increasing regulatory headwinds are going to curtail the growth plans for tier one investment banks that are, hamstrung by things like, Basel II, Basel III, capital adequacy. I think that, like the prime of prime space, that sort of ability to serve the small to medium hedge funds, ability to leave a balance sheet, to offer leveraged trading for equities, for futures, for swaps. This is an area of the business that we see a huge growth potential in as well. And Cyrus is really going to be helping to drive that segment of the business, both here in Australia and internationally. So it's a big remit. But one where we do think that, again, there's a gap opening up in the market, and we are well positioned with our balance sheet, access to tier one PBs, and technology to fill it and fill it well.
Great, awesome. That sounds really cool. I think maybe enough work topics. If you don't mind, I'll jump to some personal questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about your background. Obviously, given your accent, I think everybody, our listeners can sense that you're, as they say, from the land down under. I hope that's not an offensive term that when people say that.
I apologize for that, Nikolai.
Is that an offensive term these days? With everything sort of going on in the world in terms of how we're supposed to communicate with each other, is that still acceptable to say like, oh, he's from the land down under? Or is it absolutely taboo? It's fine.
It is absolutely fine. And look, I'm not going to say that Aussies necessarily think of themselves as from the land down under, but the other thing about Aussies, and I say Aussies as the very colloquial term for Australians, is we're very hard to offend by and large. We really don't mind so much. So saying that I'm from the land down under is certainly not going to raise an eyebrow down here. But we do have a particular habit of shortening almost every word that we possibly can in the laziest possible manner of speaking. So I think categorized by laid back approach and laid back approach to life and laid back approach to speaking often results in a pretty interesting take on the English language sometimes. But very much from Australia.
All right. So you've put me at ease. Thanks.
No problem.
So, obviously, you had a certain upbringing in Australia, and I think we can get to that a little bit later. But I noticed that you studied abroad. I think after undergraduate university, you did undergraduate studies in Singapore.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. So I spent a couple of years working for a very small. I shouldn't say very small. They're a small boutique investment bank in the US called Cantor Fitzgerald. And I was actually based down here in their Sydney satellite office. But like a lot of finance, I was sort of spending much of my time in Singapore. So I do sort of a few weeks in Sydney, a few weeks in Singapore. I was single and didn't have a family back then, so it was much, much easier. But as part of that, I went through all the local Singaporean accreditations. So I got, accreditation for securities dealing, for, derivatives dealing, structured products, all these other accreditations that you have to do if you want to be, a licensed, interdealer broker in Singapore. So because I was spending enough time there, at the time I was thinking about moving up there. I went through all of these accreditations. There's a funny story there about the actual exams, but we can come to that later if you like.
Sure.
Ultimately, it didn't end up happening because I met my now wife, and she convinced me that Sydney was the place to stay for the time being. So that opportunity sort of passed me by, and I never actually ended up relocating to Singapore. But yes, I am a fully qualified interdealer broker up there for a number of asset classes, should I ever choose to move. But for now, Sydney remains home.
Wow, that's cool. And so, what's the story with the exams? Are they quite difficult? I mean, I endured some of those exams here in the United States when I had to get my licenses for when I was working at Gain Capital, the big forex broker here in New York.
No, well, yep. The exams themselves weren't so tough, but look, at the time, I flew from Sydney to take the exam. So it's a 7-hour flight, flew up to Singapore just to sit the exam. I was literally there for the weekend. I was flying back to Sydney. So I got there, and they have these big exam halls where they, put these exams on, and, it's all correctly overseen and all the rest. And unfortunately, there was a fire alarm in the exam hall. Now, fire alarms, as everyone knows, are a pain. They're a pain in the ass. Let's be honest, no one likes them.
Sure.
But this fire alarm was particularly interesting in the sense that, in addition to a screaming siren, this one was overlaid with the song Toxic by Britney Spears. I have no idea how they did it. I've never heard a fire alarm like it before or since, but the fire alarm went off and there was Britney Spears, Toxic, screaming over these loudspeakers in addition to the siren. And the hosts of the exam, essentially the company that was running the outsourced examination, said, "Guys, we're really sorry. We are going to have to postpone. We understand this is not suitable for you guys to take the exam. So anyone that wants to leave can leave and retake the exam at no additional cost, next week or whatever," which is great if you live around the corner. But I'd flown 7 hours to be there. So I'm like, I am taking this damn exam if it kills me. And so I sat through a 2-hour exam with a fire alarm and Britney Spears Toxic on repeat for the entire period. And I'll tell you what, I cannot hear that song again without thinking of Singaporean structured products. It's quite amazing, the dent it left. Anyway,
I would think that they would give some sort of leniency on the grading of your results, given that you were distracted this whole time. Obviously, that's wishful thinking, probably, but still.
I was going to say, Nikolai, this is still Singapore, man. They don't give a lot of leniency there, buddy.
I understand. I understand.
They're pretty straight up and down when it comes to that sort of stuff.
Yeah. No, I understand. It is what it is. But that's definitely one of the oddest stories I've heard about taking regulatory licensing exams from industry colleagues. So that's a good one. I gotta write that down. So Australia, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your upbringing, like where you went to school. I'm talking like early years, right before university, because I really kind of want to know what experiences in your life living in Australia as a young man, school life kind of shaped you as a person, personally and professionally. Like, for example, some of my guests who are also in our space and are, in the institutional space, more so than retail, they tell me, when I was growing up in school, like math and science were quite popular, or they were, the curriculum in school was heavily based on math and science. And that's what led some people to then pursue, university degrees that had some aspect of math or finance, science, like all of these things related to physical sciences and math, and then led them to a career in FX or, broadly speaking, in financial markets. And I'm curious to know if you had a similar experience when you were growing up, and what kind of led you ultimately, to want a career in FX or even specifically the institutional side of the industry.
Yeah, I think to say that the school curriculum led me to finance would be correct, but in a really roundabout sort of way. So there was no particular sort of focus or topic that I really excelled at school, other than perhaps music. Really I was a musician and saw myself as a musician, at least, whether you call me a musician or not. But one of the things we did at school as part of the curriculum was, you go out into the workplace when you're about 15, 16, and you spend a period of time like in various workplaces in placements, basically being an intern. And, they encourage you to try a number of different industries. So I went into veterinary science and, did some time there. I did some time at an accounting practice, just to compare and contrast. But one of the places I did some work experience with a family friend of ours was actually on the floor of the Futures Exchange here in Sydney, which at the time was still open. And as a 16-year-old to walk in, we had to wear the yellow jackets, and a yellow jacket was basically, someone who was essentially a visitor and not to be spoken to, not to be traded with. That's for sure. But who would, help to run the chits, the little bits of paper that were essentially the trade confirmations once trades had been struck on the floor of the exchange, and you'd run them and you drop them in the box of the clearing broker that, the trade had been executed with. So I stepped in on the floor of the Futures Exchange, and this was 1997, about 2 years before the exchange closed down, as it turns out. And it was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. The energy, the camaraderie, the feeling was just like nothing else I'd ever experienced. And it was intense. I mean, it was periods of insanity punctuated by which punctuated periods of extended sort of standing around, kicking bits of paper or doing nothing. It was sort of like almost like a wartime footing where it's 90% boredom, 10% madness. And but that 10%, when the floor lit up and the market started to move, I mean, it was really something to behold. And, as a young man, that sort of just grabbed me. And at that point, I really started to get a passion for finance and financial markets and what could be delivered, not just in the sense of the excitement and the interest, but I saw it as a market that was constantly going to be evolving, that no 2 days were ever going to be the same because, so much of what we do is determined by what is happening in the market. So you can set all the strategy in the world. You can sort of, position your business for growth in different areas. You can design different products or different technologies. And then the market can completely pivot in certain ways that you didn't foresee. And all of a sudden you're having to rethink plans, strategy. You shouldn't have to be rewriting strategy on the fly based on market conditions, but certainly, markets can throw off opportunities, markets can throw off challenges from time to time that, really impact the businesses that we all live in and work in. And, I love that. I love the fact that no 2 days are exactly the same, that I'm not going to be repeating tomorrow what I did yesterday. And, that aspect of it really grabbed me to the point where at that stage, I really just knew I wanted to be a futures broker. So I sort of set myself at that point to becoming a futures broker, which is, I don't know, I thought at the time a good idea. But the exact year that I finished school, 1999, was the exact year the Futures Exchange actually closed down.
Oh.
And so that was unfortunate timing, to say the least. But nevertheless, the passion for finance was there. I went off to university, studied, did my undergraduates, went up to Singapore, listened to some Britney Spears, got all the accreditations, came back, and still, after all of that, knew that I still wanted to be in finance. And at that point, I knew that that was where I was going to be. It was just a case of finding out what the transition was. And, for me, that was a course of, a series of jobs at a couple of different firms, but it all started with that work experience in the futures market on the floor of the exchange, which, was just, I guess, pivotal, for my sort of, development and my career growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at such a young age as well, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I also saw that your career started out so after university and everything like that, your career started out at MF Global, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the now infamous MF Global.
Yes, the infamous one.
Look,
No. I was just going to say nothing bad about MF Global. I just wanted to know, was that sort of the era of when CFDs were becoming like a widely traded product? If history doesn't escape me, or I think that was. I mean, MF Global was one of the firms that was sort of the early pioneers of CFDs, or maybe I'm wrong.
No. I think you're spot on. I mean, there was what is now CMC was in existence. They've had a couple of different sort of guises over the years, certainly in the early years. So the CMCs and the IGs existed, but very few others did. And MF Global was very much at the forefront of CFD development, CFD distribution, and particularly, I think, on the DMA side of the market. So, while CMC built their own trading technology, MF Global focused on the market integration aspect and the credit aspect rather than trying to be a vendor of technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could argue that was or was not a good business decision, and sort of, I think you could argue equally both ways to be fair. But MF Global had a huge amount of success, not just in, I guess, the delivery of direct market access CFDs, which, it was felt at the time was the right model of pricing. It was fair, it was transparent, it was accountable, something that maybe the CFD industry in its early years lacked, and I think suffered from it reputationally. And I think that, say what you will about the demise of MF Global subsequently as a global entity,
Mm-hmm.
I think the approach they took to the market and the way in which they actually brought CFDs up, if you will, in the esteem of investors, of regulators, was very, very important. And I think they did it at a really important time for the CFD product broadly. And, I was really sort of, as one of my first, real jobs in broking after my short work experience stint on the
Mm-hmm.
futures exchange,
Mm-hmm.
it was something that I was really proud to be a part of. I liked that we were doing something that was a bit different. I liked that we were bringing transparency to the market, that we were sort of pushing for that transparency, that non-conflicted
Mm-hmm.
Outcome. And I guess that's something that's stayed with me. And, a number of the management team here at Invast, fast forward nearly 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
a number of the management team here at Invast worked at MF Global at that time
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
that product specifically. And I think, to be very honest, man, that ethos has carried through. It's never really left us. It's always something that we've preferred where we can to always sort of bring in transparency to our products. It doesn't necessarily mean you bring the highest yielding product to market, but it does mean that you've got a product that you can be proud of and that you can speak to openly, that you can explain readily, both to your clients, to investors, to regulators. And I think transparency is never going to go out of fashion, right? It might not always be in vogue, but it's never going to be, it's never going to go completely out of fashion. So I think it's just it's a sure thing to place your money on long term. But
Mm-hmm.
look, it was a great company to work for at MF, and I spent nearly 6 years there.
Mm-hmm.
The story of the MF Global demise, there's a whole other
That's for
podcast that we could do on
another
that one.
podcast. Yeah.
It really is. It's a hell of a story, and it's mate. There's some great sort of personal stories that come out when you start telling that one. But look, MF was a great place to work. We were at the forefront of CFDs. We were at the forefront of the wholesale delivery of CFDs. So we had
Mm-hmm.
a number of the banks were our customers. Both not just in Australia, but also in Singapore and other areas throughout APAC, and we really had a huge amount of success. Sorry, apologies. And it was just a really interesting time to be in that product because we saw the distribution opportunities open up in a way that really I've not seen since. And I think a lot of the customers that we sort of integrated with in those early days have since gone on to become themselves really significant participants in the CFD industry. And to see that evolution from was, once a fledgling customer relationship sort of 15 years ago it's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course. Yeah, well, I wanted to see fast forward 10, 15, 20 years. You've actually been in Invast for almost 10 years, I believe, at this point. And I wanted to find out kind of what's the culture like at your office down there in Sydney, and how does it differ from, let's say, places you worked at previously?
It's completely different from where I've worked previously. And that's not to be disparaging of where I've worked previously, but
Mm-hmm.
right now we have a culture, and I'm looking out over the dealing room as we speak, and I'm sort of looking at some of the people who are working on the various teams, our dealing team, our risk team, our prime services team. It's a much younger demographic than, some of the companies I've worked at previously. We've got a lot more in that sort of 25 to 35 age cohort. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great thing.
Yep.
I would argue that one of the things that I'm proudest about, both within Invast and specifically about Invast, but also, which I'm seeing across the broader industry is, finance and broking in particular is becoming more meritocratic. I think we're seeing a lot more smart young men and women coming into this industry who are there because they are smart, because they're capable, not necessarily because of, their relationships or their contacts, or the fact that perhaps they had the loudest voice in the room, which, 20, 30 years ago, I think was a part of the broking culture. There was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of screaming. Like, dealing rooms ran on energy and intensity, and that worked, and that was necessary in that era. And that led to, a huge, influx of people that had the personalities that really filled that role. And that's no bad thing. It was what it was, but I am very proud of where the industry's gone. And, dealing rooms are a lot quieter than they were. There's a lot less shouting. There's not no shouting. There's still a bit of shouting.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not like the olden days. And I think that, some of the people that we're bringing into this industry are going to make our industry better because of, the diversity they bring, the diversity of opinion, the diversity of experience, the diversity of voice. And I think those are all good things. And, culturally, coming back to like, how does it feel in the Sydney office down here? I mean, it feels quite relaxed by and large. I mean, we are very busy. There's always a lot going on, and I'm sure most brokerage houses would say the same. But because of that younger culture, there's a really inquisitive nature. We're always testing and trying new things that, maybe wouldn't be considered traditional broking sort of core business. But that's what you get when you bring, younger, more diverse people into the business. We've got an F1 racing sim, just outside the dealing room. Friday afternoons, it's beers, it's music, it's F1. It's, there's a lot of that, you wouldn't have seen so much in an old school dealing room. And, there's a really good vibe here. And I think the culture that we've got has been one of our strengths. You go to our Cyprus office, there's a distinct Aussie flavor, but they've got very much a, young, youthful culture there as well. And, I think if you get that mix between, as I say, old heads and young legs, you get a really good outcome. That's a sporting term, not anything else. But
no, of course.
That combination of experience and that youthful inquisitiveness is I think serving us very well and just creates for a good place to work. We want to be here. We want to look after our peers, and importantly, there's a real focus on, right, if we do this, what's it going to deliver to our customers? How is this actually going to help them? Is this going to be something that they benefit from? Or are we sort of navel gazing and just looking at the things that we want to achieve for our own ends? And I think that's, that part of the focus also keeps, eyes off the keyboards per se and out into the real world. Like, what are we trying to achieve here and for whom?
Yeah.
And let's get that done.
Yeah, it makes sense. And listen, to be honest, I'm always impressed when I interact with you and your team and I see you at different events and it's like the team is young and I'm like, where are you guys getting these candidates? Because, different guests that I speak to, they're in different countries, around the world, US, Europe, you're in Australia. And some people are like, listen, where we are, sometimes it's hard to, it's hard to find the right qualified candidates these days, believe it or not, even though, we're so globalized, you can get a quality education, pretty much anywhere in the world these days, right? Meaning, in the first world, quote unquote. So it's definitely very, very impressive in terms of sort of who you guys have on your team. You actually mentioned that when you were young, music was a part of your life. You said, I was a musician, or at least thought I was a musician. That was actually going to be one of my closing questions for you that I often ask guests. And because you said that music plays or played, hopefully still plays, an important role in your life. Kind of like, what does music mean to you today? A lot of young people these days, I know people that will sit at the computer and work all day and they will incessantly be listening to music in their ears when they're not on a conference call or speaking to somebody, about something. Other people that I know, personally, like they'll listen to a particular podcast or a playlist of like very soft, soothing music before they go to bed. And they're like, that actually helps me relax before I go to bed and things like that. Like, how does James, like what's in James's playlist? And again, considering that, like you said, you were a musician, previously, what's in your playlist? We already know that Britney's Toxic is in your playlist for sure, because I don't think you'll ever be able to forget that song. But yeah.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, Nikolai. Let me caveat musician, because what I was a drummer for 20 years. So if you can qualify a drummer for 20 years as being a musician, then I'm a musician. But I think a lot of real quote unquote musicians would consider that a drummer's a guy that sits up the back and just waves his arms around while the real musicians are doing what they do. But
I disagree. I disagree with that characterization.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Very kind. Look, for me, I don't listen to music at work, and that's very intentional. I don't sit in an office at work. Mm-hmm. Every office we've had, and this is my fourth Invast office, I think, in terms of office space.
Sure.
With the growth that we've experienced, we've sort of had to upgrade the offices, well, to be honest, more regular than we were actually expecting to. But we're at our fourth office now. And every time we look at a new premises, the conversation comes up, right, guys, of the C-level of the executive team, who would like an office? Mm-hmm. My answer has always been no. I want to sit on the floor. I need to hear that noise. I need to hear the feedback of the client conversations. I need to hear the feedback from the dealing team. I think that, hearing that is the best way to take the pulse check for the business. And not just from your own sake, like, is our business, humming? Are we in that good spot? Mm-hmm. Is everything running smoothly? Are there things that are sort of suboptimal that we can focus on? You hear that, you hear it in the tone of the conversations. And likewise on the client side, I sit right amongst the prime services team, and, I sort of overhear like snippets of conversations that take place every day. And for me, that is just super, super important, because it's the best way to sort of get a sense of how your clients are feeling. I mean, I love meeting clients. I love speaking to clients, seeing clients, but I can't do that as regularly as I would like, and as I have previously, but I still like to stay close. So for me, during office hours, I actually don't listen to music. Sometimes we have tunes on in the office, and Friday afternoon in particular. Mm-hmm. But that said, outside of the office, especially at the gym, where, let's be honest, most of the music that is played at any gym anywhere in the world at any given point in time is terrible. I feel like the gym is hard enough without inflicting us with that rubbish. I definitely put the AirPods in and crank the tunes when I'm at the gym. And for me, being a drummer and being raised when I was, I'll just categorize it as unpopular as it probably is these days, as anything out of the Seattle scene in the sort of like the 90s. So think like Pearl Jam, Nirvana.
Oh, that's cool.
Pretty much where I'm at.
That's cool. I think, sort of grew up on that too, my friend. So yeah.
Well, I think we're showing our age a little bit there, dude, unfortunately. But
we're not that old. Come on.
No, it's funny. I think one of the things that comes up as I now have young children is that my taste in music is, well, it gets scrutinized by the family. So I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my 5-year-old is into punk music,
really?
Like punk music, and my 3-year-old is into Daft Punk. And that is not like, that's not a quip. It's that's the way they've evolved. So they've gone in different directions. I'm sort of like just watching these two little versions of me evolve and my wife evolve. And it's interesting to see where it lands. But no, for me, look, it's really just about the gym and, hanging out with the kids. We usually put some tunes on and they like to have a bit of a boogie. So that's kind of cool. But no, during the office, it's all about just trying to pick up on the tune of how things are humming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. And I don't think you should ever feel any kind of, I don't know, shame or something that, a drummer is a real musician. And again, I'm not going to say that I have so much knowledge about, like, specifically, let's say, classic rock, but, the Stones, the Beatles, all of these classic rock bands from the 60s, 70s, the drummers for all of those bands are quite legendary. Even drummers for like heavy metal or hard rock acts like Metallica. I remember listening to Metallica when I was, in my teenage years. I mean, the amount of riffs or whatever you call them, and just the way that they play the drums in those bands is quite legendary. I mean, I think all of those drummers individually have received recognitions over the years in terms of, their input into music itself and into their bands. Granted, James Alexander was not, a drummer for Metallica in his day, but nonetheless. So, I mean, I think you should.
Come on, Nikolai. Nikolai, there was
humble about it,
Nikolai, I'm sure there was times where I thought I could have been the drummer for Metallica, but there's a big difference between what takes place in my head and reality sometimes on the music scene.
Absolutely. Yeah. That obviously that happens to all of us. So listen, last question. You did mention, you have you do have young children. How do you guys, and again, like, you and your colleagues from the office, individually, let's say, how do you guys spend your leisure time? Like, what do you guys do to decompress and relax, outside of, spending time with family and things like that? For me, stereotypically, as an American, so to say, stereotypically, I'm like, oh, they probably surf, right? Because they're surrounded by ocean, and surfing is a big sport in Australia. But then again, so is rugby, right? Maybe even cricket. I don't know. So it's not necessarily a sports question. It's kind of like, what do you and your colleagues do individually, sort of in your downtime, to relax, decompress, and things like that in Australia specifically?
Yeah. So for me, unfortunately, I am going to tick that stereotypical box, the cliche box. I do love the beach. Now, I'm not a great surfer. I have to be honest there. I am a passable surfer, but I'm by no means good. But I do love ocean swimming. Actually, that's one of the things that, my wife and I actually, pre-kids, used to do quite a lot of, is sort of, middle distance ocean swimming, which is just a great way to clear the mind and forget about everything else that's taking place on land, essentially. Hiking, bike riding, and I mean trail bike riding, not like riding a push bike through, sort of bush trails. Basically getting out of the city and anything in nature is, for me, the best way to sort of just decompress and clear the head. Across the team here, there's a bit of a rock climbing cohort here. Like, we've got a group of guys and girls that sort of love to get out and go rock climbing on weekends. So they sort of take the big rope kits and get stuck right into it. I've got a fear of heights, so that sounds like the last thing I want to do. I mean, I'd probably rather listen to Britney Spears' Toxic than go rock climbing with them, but sure, that's what they want to do, and good luck to them. As long as we've kind of got a rule, like one person on the rope at any point in time, we can't have like half of our dealing team wiped out by some tragic, rock climbing accident. So it's one on a rope at a time. But look, no, that seems to be the other thing. And, we've got a touch footy team here, which is just, touch rugby, essentially, that the guys and girls get stuck into. Again, that's probably for the younger ones in our business more so than myself. But sure. Yeah, look, there's a lot of stuff and a lot of activities that sort of take place outside of the office, but where there really is a very, very strong social network within our team. And, whether it be sort of drinks throughout the week, dinners, or these sort of ad hoc events, there's really it's a strong, strong bond amongst, some of these younger people in particular. And, a perfect example of that is when we set up the Cyprus office, there was a few of the guys and girls here who were very close friends who sort of said collectively, you know what, let's move as a team. Let's, 3 or 4 of us head over and help set up the Cyprus office. I mean, these are people who have relocated halfway across the world. As a team, to do it together, to make sure that when they got there, they'd have people around them who they trust, who that we can trust and we can communicate with easily. And I think, coming back to culture driving success, we can pick up the phone and speak to anyone in that Cyprus office day or night and know exactly what they're thinking and feeling just by the tone of their voice, because we've worked with them for so long. We understand them. And you can evolve that, and you can get that as you hire people and, they spend time within your business. But to have people who have been sort of moved around from different, Sydney, Tokyo, Cyprus, and indeed other locations in the future, it's a huge, huge benefit for us, because, that trust is there, that understanding is there from day one. And, running a multinational office from Sydney is no easy thing. I think running a multinational office from anywhere is no easy thing. But, having that really clear and unconstrained ability to communicate is hugely beneficial, because we can just move forward that much more quickly, knowing exactly what each other is thinking and feeling, and, where the pain points are. And, there's no sort of ego or angst. It's just a case of how do we resolve this and move forward. So, that culture, and I think, really instilled by some of the social activities has served us very, very well as a business.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. Well, James, I think our time is up for today for this podcast. I'm sure we'll definitely do something else in the future, because you're a great guest, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well. I wanted to actually wish you luck on your upcoming panel that you're doing at the IFX Expo in Bangkok. I think it's going to be on the topic of liquidity. You briefly mentioned it before we started our podcast. So I wanted to wish you luck there. I unfortunately will not be able to attend the Bangkok show, but perhaps we might see each other in London at the Magnet Summit in November.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will be there with bells on. We'll be taking quite a number of the team from both Cyprus and Sydney over. So 100% looking forward to that one. That's always a great expo to attend. And I think like Cyprus this year, I think, there's going to be some faces that, we haven't had the opportunity to get in front of, or at least me personally, for, a year or two. So really looking forward to that. I mean, it's long overdue. And I think, when you do spend time away, like we've all sort of had to do with, the COVID situation, it underscores the value of some of those relationships. We are very, very lucky to work in the industry we work in where, we've got a contact network that really does genuinely expand the globe. I mean, sounds like a bit of a cliche, but we've got friends, we've got colleagues, we've got people that we can reach out to and chat with and, engage with and trust in countries all over the world. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about this industry and, the business we do, that we're fortunate that we can hop on a plane, travel for us down here in Sydney, 24 hours to get to the UK. And you hop off the plane and there's people there that, you can see and greet, and immediately you just fall back into that beautiful cadence and conversation and rhythm of dialogue and, engagement, that it's just fantastic. And it's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day. We're here for the people. We all talk about business, we talk about products, but ultimately people relate to people, and it's super good to be able to just, jump on a plane and travel the world and see people with a familiar face and a smile and shake hands and, really do what we do best.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So thanks for joining us today. And again, good luck in Bangkok. And I personally hope to see you in November, and have a great rest of your day in Australia today.
Thanks, Nikolai, mate. Great to talk. Appreciate the opportunity. And best of luck to you. And looking forward to seeing you in London.
My pleasure. Cheers. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nikolai. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.